Keith, thanks for joining the Sox Machine podcast again. Mid-season special edition. Usually have you on beforehand to discuss prospects, but now we have the number one overall pick. And I'm thinking that so much has changed since the White Sox won the draft lottery, mostly for the good. I remember seeing you at the winter meetings and
Yeah.
thinking all right, we have something to hang the summer on, some summer programming, some excitement. Rock Chalowski looks pretty close to a lock for the number one overall pick, or at least like a clear favorite. The White Sox might be another 90 loss season, if not a 100 loss season. The system needs a sure thing. This is perfect. And now, smash cut to July. The White Sox are in first place. They have a lot of infielders now. And Rock Chalowski is, he's still up top. He's on top of your list, but there's some murkiness up top with directions the White Sox can go. But ultimately, this is a good thing, right?
Yes, I think they're in a good position. I just published a new ranking day before we're recording this, and I still had Chalowski at one, but I went back and forth a lot between him and Von Lackey, and I may still switch them before the draft. I think Chalowski is a little bit more of a sure thing. Lackey might actually be the higher upside pick. And what I keep hearing is that Chalowski is in their mix, but he is not their top choice. It's either Lackey or high school shortstop Grady Emerson. And I think some of that is just their preferences, them seeing players in a different way now than they had previously because of the work that Ryan Fuller and Paul Janish and others have done with a lot of their hitters, right? They saved Colson Montgomery and Jacob Gonzalez. I'd say they saved both of those careers. Both guys were well on their way to being first round busts and have now turned into, in the case of Montgomery, a big leaguer who's at least going to stick around in some role. And I am really optimistic about Gonzalez. So I think as the White Sox sort of got into it and looked at these three hitters in particular, they felt like maybe Lackey and or Emerson are guys they are better equipped to help, better equipped to work with than they would be with Chalowski.
And how much do you think like the success of this season changes or should change the calculus up top in terms of not needing a sure thing, perhaps being able to take a pick with more upside and a pick with a longer development track because they do have guys who can play shortstop immediately?
And just the way it typically works out in the draft, if you're picking very high, just setting aside the pitchers, and this year doesn't really have a 1-1 type pitcher anyway, you're going to be mostly looking at shortstops. So regardless of whether you have a truly established shortstop, and I look at Montgomery, what he's had a really good year. If you had told me last April he was going to turn into this, I would have laughed. He was striking out almost 50% of the time in AAA. That said, you can do better. It's entirely possible. Like if they take Rock Chalowski, he ends up a better option at shortstop and pushes Montgomery to another position. So I also don't think one, I just think you take the best player, period,
Hmm.
regardless of who else you have. But also Colson Montgomery is not, you know, Bobby Witt Jr., where you're saying, oh, we're not going to get any better than this. Yeah, you might actually. Montgomery is still punching out at a pretty high rate. And this is still only about a year of the sort of new version of Montgomery with pros and cons. Again, he is going to stick around as a big leaguer, but he's not a superstar. And you pick first, you want to try to get a superstar. And I don't think this year's strong start to the season should really change their philosophy. When you pick first, you got to get the best guy. I think when teams try to get too cute and try to play the money, try to move things around, you can do that even starting at pick two. But at pick one, I think you got to go nail it. And you can just see, even just in the last couple of drafts, examples of teams trying to get creative at one, Pittsburgh with Henry Davis, Cleveland with Travis Bazzana, and not getting the best player in the draft when you had them all. They were all right there in front of you, and you,
Hmm.
you ended up with the wrong guy.
The discussion around Chalowski and just having kind of an okay season by his standards and not making the
Mhm.
leap that maybe he was supposed to have his junior year
Yep.
reminds me a little bit in terms of like tenor based on White Sox experience of Carlos Rodon in 2014 and how
Mhm.
he didn't quite make the most of his junior year, and it allowed the Astros went Brady Aiken number one high school
Yep.
pitcher, Marlins went high school pitcher Tyler Kolek. Obviously, the Astros situation worked out because they didn't sign Aiken; they got Alex Bregman the following year with that pick, so
Correct.
they were able to back out of it. But when it comes to prospect fatigue and maybe just over analyzing somebody too much because they were on this platform of being the expected number one pick before the season, how much are the White Sox or White Sox people watching the White Sox at risk of doing that to themselves?
That may be happening with Chalowski. I do think, look, he plays in the Big Ten. It's not the SEC, it's not the ACC, it's not even the Big 12. This is not a premium conference. So he's not facing premium competition. And so you can still be the best player in the draft facing less than top tier competition, but you got to destroy it. You got to absolutely destroy. And he didn't. He didn't. He had a very good year. But if he is the hitter that he's supposed to be, then yeah, he would have had a better season. He would have produced better. And the underlying data would have been better also, right? It's not just performance. This has come up a couple of times recently. People asking me about certain players who performed really well or maybe didn't perform that well this year. But remember, they're looking at performance, but they're also looking under the hood. For a hitter, they're looking at things like the range of exit velocities, the launch angles, the hard hit rates, the barrel rates, and so on to give them confidence that that player will be able to perform, whether it's improving or sustaining, when they one switch to wood bats, which is still the hardest thing of all of this, evaluating hitters. But then also, by the time you get to at least to double A, you're facing better pitching. If you go from the SEC to high A, you ought to rake. It's not that much better. The big difference between SEC and high A is you're playing 6 times a week instead of 3 or 4. But by the time you get to double A, you are most nights facing better pitching than what you were going to see in the typical SEC game. And so, to me, just to take this back to Chalowski, though, I think his issue is that everything just stayed steady. And that could have been good enough. But Von Lackey had a real breakout season. And Emerson is a different story because we don't have a ton of data. And he went to play for a tiny religious school. He wanted to play for Rusty Greer as his head coach. So the competition he faced this spring was just kind of lousy. So I think a lot of this was just after last summer. It's like, that is the best high school hitter in the draft. Great swing, hit well against the best quality pitching. He was the guy when no one else could hit. He was the guy who was still hitting. He just sort of gets elevated to the top. And if you believe he's got that sort of Kevin McGonigal hit tool around him, then yeah, he should be in consideration at one.
Yeah, I was curious about Emerson, just thinking about the last time there was a preseason number one who kind of went wire to wire with Adley Rutschman.
Adley Rutschman, yep.
Yeah, and then Bobby Witt Jr. went number two. And obviously, what we know now about Bobby Witt Jr., it's maybe hard to unwind that and think back to his pure prospect state of where he was. But in terms of the gap from going from, say, like, yeah, obviously, if the Orioles took Witt number one and let Rutschman go, there might have been some consternation at the time, but history probably would have proved them correct. And they're fine either way. But in terms of like the gap between Chalowski and Emerson and such, like, where is Emerson, based on what you can tell against the competition he's faced, against Chalowski, against Lackey in that conversation, given just the less information?
I have him below those guys. I actually have him below Tyler Bell too from Kentucky, where I'm the high guy, but I look at Bell and I mean that guy played the whole year with one shoulder and still had an unbelievable season. He did do it in the SEC, facing the best competition. He's not in consideration at once. It's not worth spending much time talking about him. But to me, the difference is I don't have the degree of confidence that Emerson is the next Kevin McGonigal. And by the way, I saw Kevin McGonigal in high school. He played about 40 minutes for me. They actually came down. He played about 10 minutes for me. And I thought he's a good player. He's definitely a first rounder. And I think I had him like 20 to 25 on my board. So I didn't know at the time he was this good. And I saw Emerson this spring and I thought, maybe, I guess. It's really hard to tell with the level of competition he was facing. He wasn't quite as successful on the showcases as McGonigal was. Not so much a criticism of Emerson as it is just McGonigal was that good at the time. But then I also look, if everything goes well for Emerson, 3 years from now, is he Rock Chalowski? Is he better than Rock Chalowski? It's possible, but I would not bet a substantial amount of money on it. Say the $11 million of the first pick, right? Do I think Emerson ends up 3 years from now better than Chalowski or Lackey? I feel a lot more confident knowing what those college players are. This is one of those situations where going the college route means certainty, probability. I understand college guys fail, but we know a lot more about them. And we're not waiting so much on physical or emotional development. Not that I've never heard a bad word about Emerson's character. I'm making more of a broad statement, a 21-year-old versus an 18-year-old.
It's funny though with the White Sox, just how much has changed in that we're talking about the White Sox maybe drafting a position player, and you're saying, yeah, do it. It's because
Yeah. Right.
Colson Montgomery, because of Caleb Bonham making huge strides,
Yep.
and every time Bonham has like a cold week, you realize, well, he is 20, he's in Double A.
He's really young and from
Yeah,
Michigan, right? This guy
yeah.
didn't come from Alabama or Florida or Georgia or California, where he was facing much better competition on a regular basis. It was Michigan, where I don't know if he was in one of those leagues. There's leagues in Michigan where they play 3 balls and 2 strikes. So it is not the same thing.
Hmm.
Howard, my husband fell at a construction site. I knew it wasn't safe.
At Aiken Law, we're one of the largest filers of workers' compensation claims in the state. If you've been hurt on the job, in a car accident, or suffered a medical mistake, call 312-6-million.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's
No,
bad.
I don't think he played. Yeah, at least he
No,
did enough
I don't
showcase to
think
where
so.
that didn't come up as
Right.
a criticism. Like, oh, we don't know how he works counts. He
Yeah.
never gets to him. And when it comes to like the beyond the first pick, you mentioned that there's no point in getting cute with the money and trying to save money or disperse it for picks down the line. But in terms of like going from second round on, where is the depth? Where do you think the White Sox could maybe go, especially early on, since they do have the first pick of every round after that?
So the depth of this draft is actually in high school pitching, which of course is my least favorite category. But I will say, so the White Sox second pick is 41. At that point, take the high school pitcher. The risk at that point has been mitigated. The point of not taking high school pitchers high is don't take them in the top 25, 30, because in almost every draft, there will be better options on the board once you consider the higher risk involved in taking the best high school pitchers, because the best high school pitchers, often the guys who throw super hard, they don't work out as often as the other categories, either because they simply don't progress or because they get hurt. By the time you get to 41, if you think the best guy's a high school pitcher, absolutely take him. That may very well be the route that they go, particularly given their history. They've tended to like taking project pitchers, particularly if there's a lefty out there with a low slot. And I feel like a lot of guys are going to that low slot, low release height, get a high vert on your fastball. That's kind of on trend right now. They could also go the high school position player route. They've been tied a bunch to Landon Tome for obvious reasons, not the least of which is a local kid, and they took Jaden Fauske off the same high school team last year. I actually don't know if Tome gets to 41, but if he were still on the board at that point, wouldn't surprise me at all. And it would be a valid selection. This would not be a Nepo pick.
That's the
I
obvious
actually,
question. Yeah.
yeah, no, I think he actually does deserve to go there. And by all accounts, he made a lot of strides in the last 12 months, worked a lot. He got stronger. He's driving the ball better. He just looks a lot different. A year ago, he looked like, oh, he'll be a good college player. He was nowhere near as physically developed as he is now, where you feel like you could send him out to pro ball and he'll be able to handle the bat.
Then when it comes to the top pick and the discussion around it, as you're talking to the White Sox, as you're talking to other teams trying to figure out the White Sox are going to do, how or what is the level of certainty or uncertainty like compared to other years? Is it a normal level of chatter and possibilities, or is it teams really concerned about like needing all routes available?
So I feel like last year the Nats were, at least in rumors, still looking at more guys. Now, of course, the Nats had just fired their GM/president a week earlier, so that complicated things.
Chris Getz seems safe.
Yeah, I think he's okay.
Yeah.
I think he's okay. I think he's more than okay. Um, so last year there was definitely more uncertainty, and I knew all along Willits was a possibility, but I didn't know he was going to be the pick until really when it was made. The year earlier was Cleveland was first, and it was 4 names. And Bazana seemed likely, but again, not a lock. And I feel like that's kind of where we are now. I think it's 3 names. I don't think there's another name in there. I think it's Emerson Lackey, Chalowski. It's not Jackson Flora, the pitcher at Santa Barbara. It's not Jacob Lombard, which was a rumor at one point. And I think they toyed around with the idea, but he is way too raw as a hitter. You can't take that risk at the first overall pick. There's a spot for that. It's just not first. So for us to be 9 days out and they've got 3 names, and I feel like some degree of confidence that I actually think Chalowski is third of 3 on that list. Like that's probably a little more info than I would typically have on the first pick at this juncture, just based on the last couple of years where it often wasn't clear at all until draft day or even until the pick was made.
So to wrap this up, the question that's on everybody's mind, given that how often it could change, this snapshot, this window we're talking right now, Who do you have number one, and what's the level of certainty you place in terms of percentage on that pick?
If I were producing a mock right now, and I'll do another one on Monday,
Okay.
but I haven't started it yet. So this is
Sneak
just us
preview.
talking for now. I would go Emerson, 45%, trying to make sure my math works out on this. Lackey, 35%, Rock, 20%. I believe that gets me to 100.
Yes.
I don't think it's anybody else. And I don't think any of those guys is a giant discount either. So if White Sox fans are worried, oh, they're going to go cheap, I don't think that would be a realistic thing anyway. I don't think the White Sox have done that in the past, but I think these are all going to be guys who'll sign for slightly under slot at one, which seems to be the norm, and gives them a little room to play around at subsequent picks. But they are not, this isn't about going for a discount. I very much believe they are trying to decide who they think is actually the best player. And you can make a good argument for all three of those guys.
And the fun thing is, given your reputation for hating every single team with the White Sox picking number one, it's really hard to say between those three guys that Keith Law hates any of them, because you said they're all valid, they're all there. Like you're on record saying that they could go in any direction and it would be fine. So
I tried to hate it. I can't get there, man.
Can't bring yourself to do it. And like, you've turned around on Jacob Gonzalez, and then as soon as you wrote that article on Jacob Gonzalez, he goes 0 for 28.
Right.
I thought, like, this is Keith Law hates the White Sox. Now the White Sox hate Keith Law.
Clearly.
It comes full circle.
Yes. Yeah. He was so nice to talk to. Now I'm like, God, did I put the whammy on him?
No,
He's gonna be fine.
I think he puts the whammy on himself.
That might be true.
All right. Well, I always appreciate your time, and look forward to seeing how it unfolds.
My pleasure.